Well, good morning, everyone. My name is John Matheson, and I want to welcome you to this webinar on the path forward for Ontario municipalities. It's just 8 o'clock right now, and it's amazing watching the number of participants going up. I think afterwards it'll be fun to do a statistical analysis. My guess is all the clerks arrived just at 7:59, and the CAOs probably arrived at exactly 8, and we'll figure out statistically what other sorts of participants are arriving at 8:01 and 8:02. But it's great to have so many of you here and so many of you expressing your interest in this really important question. I got to thank StrategyCorp's Institute of Public Policy and Economy for sponsoring this. It seems kind of strange. When I joined StrategyCorp, there were 3 of us, and there's well over 70 now, and it's kind of hard to think that we've become big enough that we can have our own think tank. I kind of always wanted to have a think tank, so it's a sort of a life goal achieved, I guess. And the person who's helping us do that is Mitch Davidson, who's the former, among other things, the former Director of Policy for Premier Ford. And the think tank specializes in innovation and growth in the economy and the creation of original research for our clients in support of all those goals and supporting their own corporate goals. So they're the sponsors of this event, and there's all kinds of fabulous content that Mitch and his team put together. It is really worth following the Institute's feed because the interviews they have with people and the quality of what they're putting out, it really is extraordinary. And I'm going to prove that to you today with our really extraordinary panel that we have. I want to introduce the 3 folks who I'm going to be speaking to for the next hour to share with you their experiences around service delivery reviews and municipal innovation. First, Julie Gonyou, who's the CAO of Elgin County. There's Ken Kelly, who's the CAO of Mississippi Mills. And there's Tamara Wilbee, who's the CAO of Dysart Township. And we've had the pleasure to work with all 3 of these CAOs and their municipalities over the course of the last year. And we chose them because we thought you'd be really interested in some of the insights that they'd have about these important questions. Now, just one word of housekeeping. The chat line on the side, and we're getting on for a year into COVID, so I'm sure you know how to operate that. If you have any comments along the way, I'll be monitoring those, and while we have some questions to get going to provide a structure for the session, please do feel free to post any questions you have in the chat, and I'll try to either work them in organically or towards the end, or put them in as a whole or free question. But we're certainly very interested in hearing some of your participation too. So without any further ado, good morning to my panel.
Good morning.
So we're just going to go through a few questions at the start, and I think Ken, I'll begin with you, but I'll ask each of you this too, just as we get going. I mean, we've all had the same elephant in the same room for the last year, which is trying to carry on normal operations at a time of COVID. So you all did SDRs at a time of COVID, and frankly, an SDR is a tricky enough thing to do at the best of times. So just for context, what kind of state of affairs were you dealing with in your municipality at the time you started it? Like how much actual disruption were you dealing with, or how much normalcy were you dealing with? What was the, how did it feel when you got going?
Thanks, John. Well, basically, I think at the time that we kicked off our SDR, it was about May, June. So we had some time to get used to doing business a little less in person. Now we did open up, and our staff were back doing what they do, making sure that our residents are safe and that they have clean water, and that our programs were open. But we were limited to some degree in trying to do your best to wear your mask, social distancing, things like that. But the platform we're kicking off with virtual meetings did allow a little bit of flexibility in that a lot of people could join in from various locations, and it wasn't, some of the logistics were easier because sometimes it's just easier to jump in on a computer to a session than it is to say we all physically have to meet in the boardroom or the lunchroom or the conference room or the training room or whatever like this at this location, and people have to build in the travel time. So I think for our project, it was relatively short. Our SDR was comprehensive but fairly high level, and we went. We were about three and a half months, and we did actually manage to incorporate a lot of staff interaction, staff focus groups, and focus groups with the community as well. And again, the virtual platform allowed a lot of people, I think, to chime in and to maybe if they didn't, express their opinions, at least they could hear the discussions and things like that. And then, of course, we did use things like doodle polls and Survey Monkey and whatnot to also gauge people as well. So using, I think, a lot of the tools, the technology has really helped, and it gives a different flavor to, I think, an SDR in being able to do some of that. So I think overall it worked fairly well, even with COVID in consideration. I'm pleased with the results of our SDR.
How about you, Julie? What were you dealing with when it got going?
So our situation was a little bit different from Ken's. We actually had our kickoff meeting in February, and then we set a number of kind of lofty goals about who we would consult with and when. And so by mid-March, we had to pivot quickly and adjust all of our plans, and that included an extension. So we sought out an extension for the timelines and deliverables from StrategyCorp to for an additional 6 months, I think. So we stretched it out, and it was important for us to be able to reach out to the frontline staff in our long-term care homes as part of our service delivery review. And of course, they were slightly overwhelmed at the onset of the pandemic and all of the additional measures they had to put in place. So we were thankful to have an extension, and as Ken said, we were able to engage more staff in this process as a result of the technology that we so quickly adapted to as a result of the pandemic. So in the end, it all worked out, and we wrapped up in November. So from February to November, that was the length of time we spent on our service delivery review.
And how about you, Tamara? What were you kind of facing on a practical, on the ground level when you were getting going?
Well, when we first started, it was March, so right at the very beginning of the pandemic. At that point, we had just started meeting with our control groups. We were meeting 3 times a week, and then we were meeting with the local CAOs 3 times a week as well. So it was a little overwhelming at the start, but it also helped us set the foundation for going into the service delivery review, because we'd already established, especially at the county level review, those mechanisms to get those meetings off the ground right away, and we'd set up that communication course. So it actually, we got moving fairly quickly as we got used to the technology and doing everything remotely. It was not too bad, actually.
Yeah, I got to tell you, from the perspective of somebody who was on the other side, we were all, wondering how it would work like everyone else. But it did start to occur to us that, like a couple of you suggested, that there were almost some benefits to the rapid adoption of digital online meeting technology that actually facilitated the process rather than becoming a burden. Although, you miss the in-person contact and all that. But on the other hand, you do sort of get some efficiencies. I know the host community isn't remote, the consultants are remote. But nonetheless, if it takes you 3 hours to get to a 1 hour meeting and then 3 hours to get back, it's 7 hours of time for 1 hour of productivity. And so, the digital meetings becoming the norm certainly didn't hurt in that regard as much as they created lots of other challenges. But there were a lot of very interesting offsetting factors. Tamara, go ahead.
It also happened at a time when a lot of people were working at home. So there was a lot more flexibility. Like, they weren't all out trying to juggle all their other meetings going on. It was easy for me to pinpoint them and set things up and keep that coordination going quickly.
Yeah. Now, service delivery reviews are themselves kind of a controversial topic. I mean, it's been said sometimes they're things that are done for an organization. Sometimes they're things that are done to an organization. Sometimes they're things that are done with an organization. I mean, they're not always without controversy, at the point of inception. And I was just wondering, Tamara, where did the idea of doing the service delivery come from in your case? Was it something that was staff initiated, or was it council initiated, or was it a meeting of minds, or how did that come about?
Actually, for the Dysart one, it wasn't honestly something that was on our radar from our own end. We were working with the county at that point on a joint RFP to do a service delivery review. But actually, when the funding came out for it, it was actually an opportunity. And one of our council members actually sat down with me because just when the announcement of the funding came out, he happened to be in my office, and we kind of went back through it and said, you know what, we could apply for the funding, and there's still a lot that we could learn about within our own organization that's outside of the scope of what they're doing at the county level. So we really didn't think we had much of a chance at the funding because the county was going in too, but we did check to make sure we weren't jeopardizing theirs, and we were told we weren't. So we put our name in and got the funding, and here we are. But so it was very much staff and council, and councillors were very involved in giving their input into the RFP, so that they bought into it right from the start, at least from the Dysart level. I can give more comment from there.
How about you, Ken? What was it like in Mississippi Mills?
Well, I mean, I guess where it started, coming from a consulting background, I did a lot of engagements in the municipal sector as part of what I've done in the past. So in looking at and being new to Mississippi Mills in this organization, one of the things that I wanted to do rather early was to do a review of the organization. Sometimes they're called core services reviews, service delivery reviews, value for money reviews, what have you. But I wanted to get that sober second thought, that third party coming in and taking a critical look at the organization, not just trying to run off of my perceptions and my view of what I think should happen. So basically, I had incorporated this into my first year plan long before it had kind of been brought to, I guess, the municipal modernization funding program. This was where I wanted to go. The municipal modernization funding kind of just fell in our lap. It was like, oh, great. Hey, this is fantastic. So we actually did our review kind of outside of the regular intake program. We used the original allotment of municipal modernization funding. So we weren't under the same parameters in terms of deadlines and things like that. But it was looked upon as, I think, an opportunity for us to take that critical look, but also an opportunity for us to learn from the consultants coming in about their experience in other areas. So we were looking for the improvements, not necessarily just the cost savings. And I think that made a difference in the findings and the recommendations that came out of our review, which are probably a little bit different than most people's experiences, I think.
That's a really important point, Ken. I'm going to make sure we come back to that one about what you find depends a lot on what you're looking for. And,
Exactly.
and I think that's a really important thing for us to come back to in a minute. But Julie, I'll just ask you, what was the origin of yours?
Well, I'd say that council over the past 3 or so years had been kind of attacking the pursuit for efficiencies as a sort of piecemeal approach. And so certainly the opportunity to apply for funding through the Municipal Modernization Fund offered us the chance to take a corporate-wide approach to organizational efficiencies and finding ways to improve our service delivery. So it wasn't a tough decision to make at the time to take that corporate approach.
So I just wonder, maybe just building on that, Julie, how did you involve your council on the front end? I mean, we just heard from Tamara that like a councillor was in right at the very start of the idea when, as the news was coming in about the funding stream. How did you involve your council on the front end of the review?
Well, I certainly thought that ensuring that council was leading this process and well positioned to champion this process was critically important. So not only did they consent to applying for funding, but they were also critical in terms of setting priorities and goals. And they directed which areas we would be doing a kind of fulsome analysis of, and they led the process in that way. They also had to ensure that this process aligned with their existing goals and priorities. So they they ensured that alignment with strategic plans and action plans, and then along the same vein, staff ensured alignment with operational plans. So it all kind of dovetailed together nicely. And I have 9 members of council on Elgin County's council, and all of them were incredibly supportive of this process. And that went a long way to ensuring staff supported this process as well. So they championed it right from day one.
Yeah, I think that point about when you have that alignment, it creates a safe zone for staff participation. I think that's a really critical piece, because it's if everyone's approaching the process with kind of an open hand, then it's open season on good ideas. But if there's a structural nervousness about a process, it really makes it much harder. Particularly as somebody facilitating sessions with staff members, makes it a lot harder to get people sharing their ideas when they think that ideas might not be welcome. So that's really an essential piece. Tamara, how did you engage your council, like in the actual process, as opposed to the origination of the process? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, they stayed informed throughout, and actually at Dysart, through all of our workshops with the department heads, both the mayor and I participated. So I had her in on all of those discussions. So I found that's been very helpful in terms of leading the initiatives forward, because she's very intimate with what brought those bigger priorities forward and what the background work is going into it. So I found that's been really helpful. And council's certainly been engaged. Some of our councillors asked for multiple interviews if they didn't feel like they had enough time to put it in, which StrategyCorp obliged them with. And so I think everybody felt like they had their voice. And certainly during our the presentation in November, we had it, and councillors were engaged in asking questions. And we have another meeting planned for next month to keep rolling on it. So far, so good.
How about you, Ken? What did you do anything different by way of council engagement at the start? Or?
No, I don't think we differed from either Tamara or Julia. I do think, though, the linkage to your strategic plan is important. So when I came here to Mississippi Mills, they hadn't had a strategic plan for a number of years, and so there was no map, there was no guidance, and in an early in the term of council, I mean, generally you set that agenda and you know where you're going, and that hadn't happened. So as council started down the road of the strategic plan, it was easy to see that the service delivery review could be incorporated into that, and was something that council bought into as a very early priority for their strategic plan and the agenda to be delivered for them in their term of office. So I think, from that standpoint, having that as a clearly documented, this is a priority of council, we want to see this happen, is very important. If it's just a staff initiative, or it's just an initiative of one portion of the organization, it's not going to be as you say, like fulsome. It's not going to be comprehensive. And I do think you need that kind of higher level kind of organization or corporate wide piece, even at a high level first. This organization did a departmental SDR a couple of years back, and I don't think one recommendation was implemented, at least not a major initiative of it. So it kind of has to have a structure to it if you're going to do it.
Well, it's really interesting that you said that, because you guys are sort of sharing your perspectives. I'll tell you that from the point of view of a service provider, it's immensely satisfying work making people's hopes come true. It's not so satisfying at all, when you think you're replicating the Spanish Inquisition, like coming in to, seek out imperfection and punish like that. And that is never the way that we set out to do it. But it's funny how we're treated as if that's exactly what we're here to do. I don't know, maybe it's the black turtlenecks. Maybe I need to start dressing in my turtlenecks. But that alignment of where, council's trying to make something good happen, staff is totally open to having something good happen, because so the consultants are just coming in as enablers. It's completely different from the mindset of auditors, or you know, people who are finding fault. I mean, we're always really quick to say that we co-create solutions with people and just kind of help coordinate and make stuff happen, because you guys are always the real experts in your organization, and what we do is try and find linkages and connections. But that sense of buy-in is what makes it so fun to come to work, honestly. I guess we've talked a bit about the involvement of council, and I think we've talked a little bit around the involvement of employees, but and maybe starting with you, Tamara, this time, is how did you engage your employees, and how far down into the organization did you engage them, and how did that all work?
Well, we actually started really early. We started probably 6 months before we got even into an RFP level at the county, because we knew it was coming and the talks were there. So internally, our department heads and I basically identified all the shared services and collaborations that we were already doing with the other municipalities and county, and the staff further went through and identified things that they thought could be done better or more opportunities for sharing. So we spent probably a couple months doing that internally, without any real requirement to at that point. So it really got people prepared so that when we actually got into the projects with both the county and our own service delivery review, they'd had lots of group discussions about it internally. They really thought through these processes objectively and were ready to give input. And from what the feedback I got from StrategyCorp, they did give good input. So hopefully that worked well. But
it's funny you say that, because we never know what people are saying after they leave the meeting, but we've got the notes so like we can get a pretty good sense of whether they gave us great advice or not. But we never know whether they really felt listened to until, you know, a little bit later. But it is kind of fun sometimes that, you know, you've reached people because they feel safe to send you an email and say, hey, I had another idea, or hey, I just wanted to share this, or hey, we were talking afterwards and we thought of this. And that always feels really great when they feel like it's a process for them that they can engage in that way.
yeah.
Julie,
sorry. I was just going to say, you asked about the depth of the, how many people were involved as well. We had pretty much all of our admin staff. Now that's only 20 some, it's not huge. Participated in workshops and all through Zoom or whatever technology. And we had reps from the roads department, from the union, from the park staff, from the landfill staff. So everybody had an opportunity pretty much to bring forward their view of what improvements could be made or whatever else from their various areas. And I think people felt comfortable for the most part taking part in that process.
And how did you organize the staff participation, Julie?
Well, my situation was a little bit different because I didn't have as much lead time as Tamara had. So we had to pull this together very quickly. And a key component right out of the gate was that we had to make sure that staff understood what a service delivery review meant. And so there was a lot of education that had to happen before we even solicited volunteers to participate in the process. So I think we were pretty successful in engaging our staff at all levels of the organization. So from frontline to senior leadership team, we had, I think we were able to reach either through survey or through one-on-one interviews or focus groups. We were successful in reaching about 300 out of our 500 employees. So I'd say that that was a pretty good process. And as John, you mentioned, being able to email the consultants, you know, without having management intervention or, you know, you were able to collect objective and real information from our staff that, you know, they didn't hold back. So we were thankful for that opportunity as well.
How about you, Ken? How did you manage the consultation and things with staff?
Well, like we discussed, I mean, a lot of it was done virtually, but you were going deep into the organization, and it was all departments. Like I said, we did a comprehensive review, so all of our main or core departments were involved. So whether it was public works and roads, it was recreation, it was corporate services, planning, building, everybody had their opportunity for focus groups and things like that. One key point there, though, is kind of whether as say the lead staff person or the champion, whether you're involved in those focus groups with staff. And it is kind of it's a conscious decision. And we had senior staff weren't involved in the focus groups that were deep with the organization. The corporate strategy group, StrategyCorp, sorry, basically led those, and we weren't there to kind of listen in or anything like that. And we were hoping that would help put staff at ease, and that everything was on the table, and that they didn't have to hold back. And whatever they wanted to say, they were free to say it. And that's important to communicate as well, that there's not going to be any ramifications for being a participant in these reviews, because they do have that history or that perception that they're really about either getting rid of people. And we did engage our union as well. I mean, there's lots of stigmatism about what these reviews are. So you do go through those processes of engagement as well to make sure that everybody's in line. And we brought the union in terms of here's the results, or here's where we are now. And what do you think, or do you have anything to add? We were very open. I feel we were very open.
Now, I want to come back to that point you made earlier about what you find has a lot to do with what you're looking for. And so, Ken, what were you looking for? And are there any good examples of how you found it?
Well, I mean, I think from our standpoint, and again, I've been through these a number of times as kind of the consultant as well. And we had a sense, and there was a sense in the community that the organization hadn't gone through this review, that the organization was reluctant to do this. And that seemed to be this public perception. And we wanted to demonstrate to our ratepayers that we were conscious of the funds that they give us. We were efficient. We were pushing the envelope to do the things that we thought are necessary for this organization. So we were looking at this review partially as a review to say, no, things aren't maybe as bad as you think. So we were looking for that type of outcome. Another component of the research and that we wanted to see was how we stacked up against other comparable municipalities with comparable parameters and comparable characteristics, not just our neighbor next door. So we wanted the comparisons to be broad, but we're not looking for apples to apples. We know that doesn't exist, but we wanted them to be at least realistic as best we could. And one of the outcomes of a lot of what we had from our project was that this organization is lean, but it is missing key components within the structure. And again, when I say looking at from a comprehensive standpoint, a corporate-wide standpoint, the previous review that was done in a line department identified a lot of corporate issues. But you couldn't fix the corporate issues just for one department. It had to be fixing them for everybody. So we had to know the impacts for everybody first. So we kind of had to step back. And this is why I think when we went looking at this, we knew there's going to be other rounds, there's going to be other iterations of service delivery reviews in this organization. But we had to start at the top first. Let's do a corporate comprehensive one, and we'll figure out where we need to do the extra work. So again, I think the findings that we were looking for were, where do we compare? How are we? We think we're lean. Are we lean? Yes, we are. And that was a validation standpoint. And then also, if there are savings that can come about or suggestions or improvements, fine. But the savings weren't the be all end all. And that started with, the impetus for our RFP and our whole project. It's not just about savings. It's about how do we improve the organization? Where do we need to take it? Again, connecting it strategically. Right, the strategic plan wasn't about cost saving. The strategic plan was about what are the goals of council, and the goal of council was they want to improve the organization.
How about you, Julie? What were you looking for?
So I think we were looking to find new and improved ways of delivering the services that we already provide. We were also looking for ways to improve our working relationship with our 7 lower tier municipalities. So we have a number of shared services that we have with either the separated city, our neighbors at the city of St. Thomas, or our 7 lower tiers. So we wanted to kind of pinpoint the areas of tension and codify processes that would help us move forward with a very productive working relationship and kind of set the stage for expanding shared service opportunities with our partner municipalities. And at the end of the day, we wanted to find some efficiencies in a couple of key service areas, most notably long-term care. So this is an area where we augment the provincial contribution by $5.3 million a year. We have 3 long-term care homes and we provide exceptional service, but we haven't been successful in finding ways to get that $5.3 million number down to a reasonable number for our ratepayers. So we had lofty goals for this service delivery review.
And Tamara, what were you on a search for?
Basically with the Dysart review, it was an internal review of administration and services as opposed to operational issues so much. So we were really looking, I guess in a lot of ways, staff are looking for support too, to get some of their initiatives on paper and identified and getting council behind them so we can start getting budgets. And I think this process helped bring some of those issues forward, and they're now identified, whether it's roads digitization or online customer service or things that we need to do to improve our service levels for the community and increase efficiencies while we do it.
And that's actually sort of on the way where I was going to go next. Were there 1 or 2 findings that stood out as being the most useful to you?
With Dysart, I'd say the customer service was a big thing, and not so much just from the end of being nice to everybody, but we have a really high seasonal population. So it's always been a challenge to serve that population year round when some of them might be snowbirds or they might just be here on weekends. So whether it's the public engagement process or whether it's just filing a building permit or getting a burn permit. So the process of going through this report and the recommendations supported moving towards more online processes. So this has been really helpful to move a lot of things forward really quickly, that we're all in the works and had some budget reserves planned to build up year over year to get there, but things are now moving today instead of 3 years from now. So that's the most useful, I think, overall. At the county level, I think probably the most useful recommendation has been the identification of an economic development officer, because it's been a gap in the community for a number of years since the county stopped providing economic development services a few years ago, and it got put down to the local levels, but there hasn't been a lot of action in that regard. So it's looking like it's going to go back up to the county level.
And what about you, Ken? What was the most useful thing that came out of yours?
I think it was the hiring of new people. So our SDR recognized that, as I said, we were a lean organization. We are a lean organization, and that over time, decisions had been made by successive councils not to fill some roles. Staff were reluctant over time to bring forward those asks of, can we bring in some new people because of budget pressures? And what this SDR basically said was, if you want to grow this organization, if you want to stay in the position that you are, you're going to need to create some capacities. And if everybody wants to talk about how we're going to improve services, you have to have the backbone to do that. And that includes IT, that includes human resources department. This is a small organization, and those were not present. And when managers are having to be their own IT people, their own human resources person, as well as the expert in their program delivery as program managers, it doesn't always result in the best things. So council recognized that we needed these key supports, and that was a key finding out of the service delivery review, was investment in that regard. The other thing, again, as this organization is fairly lean, there wasn't a lot of positions available for succession planning. So basically you went from a management level to the front line. So there was nobody in between. So when somebody did leave the organization at a senior level, it really hurt, right? I mean, it's a big hole to have to fill. And then when somebody does come in, they have to come in and hit the road running, so to speak, really quick. And you know, those were some other things that that are identified that, you know, over the long term, yes, this is how this organization is going to implement those recommendations and work forward. So again, I think our findings out of our SDR were probably not the norm, and you know, I think it does show that some of these, that the SDRs can critically look at an organization, and they can come back with, you need to invest more, or you've got an opportunity to save some. So I think the processes are sound.
How about usually, was there anything in particular that you found like most helpful or most relevant to get on with implementing?
For sure. There's almost too many to mention, but the service delivery review did identify 12 high impact areas, and within the high impact areas are, you know, as I previously alluded to, improving the working relationship with our local municipal partners and opportunities to expand in 5 other areas in terms of shared services with our partner municipalities. Some pretty bold recommendations associated with how to save money in long-term care, organizational redesign, and that would be to improve workflow and overall service delivery, which was a key component, certainly in serving the public. And then leveraging technology to resolve our remaining paper processes was a big one in finding efficiencies. So something that, you know, we kind of put on a back burner because the process is working fine, but when you actually see the dollar figure associated with how much productivity you would gain if you were to leverage technology, that was certainly an eye opener and something that we'll be pursuing.
Yeah, you know, we find again and again, everybody wants to live in the box of doing more for less, which of course is the happiest box that you can be in a service delivery review. But sometimes service delivery reviews, like Ken was saying, identify that actually what you need is more and you're going to have to pay more for it, or at the very least more. And if we're lucky and if we do it right, we can get away with paying the same. And IT is the biggest enabler for any, you know, in the absence of magical solutions, IT is a close second. Investments in it tend to be the things that really yield the huge productivity benefits. I mean, we've had a couple of comments in the chat about technology as enabler of that kind of thing. And then you know, what we found across a lot of the SDRs, because we did, actually I should have counted how many, but it was over 20 this year. We found IT and pooling IT assets and having like centralized leadership on it at a county level, so that you don't have to have all the local municipalities, you know, maintaining that level of permanent staff count to be able to have, you know, access to the quality kind of IT service that they need. We found that that was a big one that came up again and again and again. Did you guys, I think we had IT recommendations in each of your, yeah. So, you know, we've had a couple of different questions in the chat. And I just want to acknowledge David Arbuckle, who is a distinguished StrategyCorp alumnus, but who just this week assumed his new role as head of AMCTO, and so it's great to have David here, and we certainly wish him all the best in his new role, and we'll know he'll do a great job. But he asked, and of course I was going to ask, okay, so how about implementation? And David specifically said, how are you going to implement the recommendations with limited resources? But more generally, did the report leave you in a good position for implementation? And maybe I'll start with Ken and work away around.
Yeah, I mean, I think StrategyCorp's report did lay the groundwork for what we needed to do. And we went back to council with, you know, from the senior management team, we went back with our report of, this is how we're going to own the intelligence, the analysis, and the recommendations that came out of the SDR report. And when we were looking at what we could do with the recommendations, you often hear about, and like I said, this organization had past experience where the recommendations came in and they weren't really actioned. So it was important to put down on paper a commitment from management, this is what we are going to do. Now, again, some of our findings were probably a little bit easier to grapple with than some other reviews, because ours did involve investments in people and bringing new people on. So we're in the stage now of writing job descriptions, job evaluations. Then we'll be going out to market looking for people and things like that to fill those positions. But we also did a reorg as well as part of that. So we've done some adjusting, and we're starting to move the organization now, as our restructuring process. And again, you're tweaking people's job descriptions, in particular at the senior management level, to bring in additional responsibilities to some of them. So our next stage will be, again, linking up to our strategic plan, but going out to market with things like looking for a digital master plan. So again, the IT, like I agree with you, John, IT is probably a key part of a lot of the reviews, but IT is the enabler that we're looking for in so many projects. And, we've even been limited in implementing various financial components and efficiencies, simply because we don't have that IT capacity, and you're limited in how to make things connect together appropriately. And nobody wants to be the one to break something. So, you're tasked. And I saw one of the questions in the SD, coming through the chat group, as well as how are you going to do it with limited resources? And this is the challenge. And I think for the most part, it's going to be probably slower than most people would like. And I think that's probably our biggest frustration. We know what we want to do. We know we should do it, but it's the resources and the timing to get it done. And with COVID layering in on top of things, from a senior management team and a management level, I think everybody has a lot more on their plate, and trying to put in some of these new projects is going to be challenging.
It's funny you mentioned slow, Ken, because we had an experience twice this year, but the one that really stands out for me in a municipality that shall remain nameless is we did an org review about 5 years ago and identified about 5 or 6 strategic gaps, because this is a municipality that's growing significantly. And yet, like everybody, they want to keep a lid on taxes, and so they resist new hires, but they have new challenges. And so we identified these things. And I think people were kind of grumpy when we first filed the report, because we said, you know what, you got a bunch of gaps, and over time you're going to need to fill them. And it was kind of fun, because we came back in the context of doing some more work, and we said, you know what, we finally implemented the last of your recommendations. And so there was no talk about, we were kind of annoyed that you told us we had these gaps. It was all, well, it may not have been what we wanted to hear, and we may not have had the money to deal with them, but you were right, because basically you listened to us and we identified these gaps together, and it might not have been what we wanted to hear, but it was what we needed to hear. It just took a while to fix it. And I think, my favorite municipal finance joke is, how many municipal finance guys does it take to screw in a light bulb? And the answer, as many of you have heard me say, is, well, it's one, but it has to be phased in over 4 years. And I think this kind of patient implementation is part and parcel of reality in the municipal world, and that reality doesn't get suspended just because you just did a new report. It continues to exist. You just have to find a way to chip away at it, one priority at a time. How about you, Julie? How about your implementation approach?
Well, the service delivery review actually identified short, medium, and long-term goals, and so we're developing a plan that aligns with council's action plan that supports their strategic plan to figure out the timing and the investment required in some of the action items. So for us, it's pretty simple and straightforward. I think of the 110 recommendations, council feels an obligation to review all of them and consider all of them. So we're just kind of chipping away at it. And some of the short-term goals are what I would call low-hanging fruit. So they're quick and easy wins. And, it's a quick tech solution, inexpensive tech solution to resolve a paper process that we can build upon. So I think we're well positioned for implementation in Elgin County, but it is going to take years.
And how about you, Tamara?
Well, with the county, we just met last week with county council. And after a bit of discussion, we made some initial recommendations to get them moving for their budget. So identified an economic development officer, and then later in the year, a procurement person. So those are the two initial things that are going to cost money. So they've got that discussion out of the way, and we'll fine tune that and then carry on throughout the year with looking through the rest of the priorities in detail. At our level, we're actually a little different than all of you. We haven't got a strategic plan. So that's one of the priorities identified within the Dysart plan, is to do that. So that's on our priority list for this year, and some money has been included in the budget for that. We have a meeting planned with our council next month, a special meeting to go through this, to go through the whole document and look through examine all the priorities in a little more detail now that they've had time to digest it. A lot of the priorities are ongoing projects we're working on anyway. It just continues to lend support. We've got staff members now who are including references to the service delivery review in their reports when they want to show the tie back into the priority and where it fits, and that it has council support. So that's nice to see. So basically, yeah, I think we're ready to roll. We're getting some quick discussions to try and get budget taken care of. But a good long-term plan to keep working through it.
And I just want to ask, were there any surprising findings, like things that you weren't expecting in the final report?
Not surprising in terms of issues, but surprising in what some of the outcomes could be. One in particular, the opportunity to do more with short-term rentals. There's been a lot of call from a lot of sides for some more regulation or licensing, whether it's from the environmental viewpoint or the economic development viewpoint. So there are some opportunities there to both address licensing and regulation, to address environmental issues, to address the economy and everything else. So I think that was surprising, the amount of funds that could be brought in to help to go back out into better servicing.
Any surprises on your end, Ken?
I guess from our standpoint, like I said, I mean, being a lean organization, we were pleased with the findings around adding capacity. But some of the other findings or recommendations that came out around better alignment or better connectivity between your day-to-day work and particular council work and your strategic direction. So how do you incorporate better into the staff reports that come forward on a regular basis, connectivity to strategic direction? So, are we going to be incorporating things into, our everyday business, which for a lot of the senior management team would be like a staff report on day-to-day business? How does that connect into strategy, and how does it help align? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to go from top to bottom always and pointing people in the right direction. And I think part of what our SDR and StrategyCorp rightly pointed out was, and I think there's a diagram in one of our reports, the hierarchy, and I think our consultant, Chris Laredo, and looked at it and called it the hamburger, I think it was. And, it's the hierarchy of how things fit in terms of strategy, council setting direction, long-term plans, master plans, and how all of these pieces fit together. And I think sometimes, in particular for smaller organizations, it's a struggle to have all those pieces in place. So I think from helping articulate what the organization needs to do or needs to put in place, even from the standpoint of making master plans, strategic plan, et cetera, work together. I think that was a good to see, and coming from this SDR report that we had.
How about you, Julie? Any surprises?
No real surprises aside from seeing the final report, which was over 130 pages in length and 110 recommendations. Initially, that was a bit of a shock. But other than that, once you saw how they were grouped into 12 high priority areas, it made a lot of sense. But when you think, oh my goodness, we have 110 ways to improve, that was the initial shock, and we're over it now.
I always think one of the big surprises on our side is when we're able to finally get what we think is the last of the typos out of a 130-page document the night before we're due to submit it to the clerk. But they really are a huge team effort, and that's why you get 130 recommendations. And you know, one of the benefits, they're not all 130 of equal weight, like you mentioned. There might be 10 or 12 or 14 or so that we do deep dives on because we think they're high yield. But we always think it's really important to not edit out the small things, because the small things often come from the direct lived experience of your employees. And there's something really satisfying about knowing that somebody said it in a workshop, taking it down faithfully, reproducing it so that they can see their work in the final report. That's what makes sure that engagement isn't like a sham of consultation, but a real consultation. And that's one of the reasons why we love doing the interviews, because as Michael Fenn is fond of saying, we may not be able to find you one improvement that'll save you 10%, but I bet we can find you 10 that'll improve you 1%. And together, you know, that's a 10% savings. So we've got a few questions, and I'd like to try and get through them. Generally, there's a couple that speak to the challenge of doing SDRs in a two-tier environment. And I just want to put this out to the group. I've noticed that sometimes there's politics involved in two-tier environments. And I'm just curious, are there any particular learnings that you have from doing one, and maybe focusing on the positive? Are there things about doing SDRs in two-tier environments that make them more successful and less likely to be akin to sticking your finger into an electrical socket? Any one of you?
No, nobody jumps at this question. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting, John, in terms of both Tamara and Julie are county, and Tamara's wearing kind of both hats and things like that. But from a lower tier, it's hard to do the linkages to the county on your own, in isolation. And really, in order to do some things in terms of working with the county, you have to have buy-in from multiple municipalities to look at these services, because it would be very hard, for instance, to work into a service delivery report or a piece of work, a review of public works between one municipality out of 8, which is our situation, and the county. Because I mean, how's the county going to really change their operations up? So it has to be holistic. So from that lower tier to county, the shared service piece is a little bit challenging, and there has to be a collective will to do it. I applaud both Tamara and Julie, who seem to be able to do that. I know Renfrew County here have done it. We haven't gone down that road here in Lanark County. I think there's a will on behalf of our council that we'd like to see it happen in that way, but maybe it'll come in time.
Any comments from either of you? Good.
Well, I would just say from our point, from what review we just did just at Dysart, it was probably easier and quicker and more compact because we had kind of control over the process and could adapt. But excuse me, with the county process, I think there was a lot, still lots of good information and everything else, but the process of determining who to present to at what time and what order, and because it was involving county council and all the local municipal councils, so there was the whole dynamic of at what level do you consult with all of them as a whole, or do you go to them individually? And so that's been a bit of a challenge going through it, but I think we're working it through. We presented the final report was presented to all 5 councils together on Zoom. So there were 24 councillors and 5 CAOs on the meeting. So it'll be interesting, I think, with the last meeting we had, it was just county council and the CAOs. So I think we'll start getting back into the implementation committees more than and just reporting back to the councils. But
right.
For Elgin, we were very interested in hearing from our local municipal partners and ways that we could improve how we deliver services together at the upper and lower tier level. So having focus groups that I wasn't involved in, just the 7 local CAOs were kind of leading the charge there. So they worked closely together to come up with some great recommendations that were reflected directly in the service delivery review. So So in that way, we had great buy-in locally in the service delivery review. So worked out well.
So we're getting close to our time, and I just wondered if maybe I'll start with you, Ken, if you had sort of one piece of advice to someone who was setting out to do a service delivery review, what would it be?
I think it would probably be, if you're starting this, I mean, start again at a high level. Don't assume that you know where all of the savings would be, or all of the recommendations are going to come from. Like don't necessarily cherry pick one department to go in, or one area that you think is the source that's going to get everything you want. I would think start off at a high level. Look for your focus areas. So, this is the typical approach to, I think, a service delivery review is start out big and then try and narrow in. But even still in that project, we know, I mean, we did a short SDR. We know that we are now going to do some deep dives into some other areas of the organization again. So it's going to be an iterative process. It's not going to be one shot, and it does take follow through like you do. We did have, as I said, we owned the report from StrategyCorp. Management has decided what's going to happen, and now we're going further into some departments to do additional work. So I think my advice would be, don't look at it as just a one shot, and don't think that you're going to get everything you need out of this one project. There is going to be follow through. There's going to be other things like Julie, you have 110 recommendations. I mean, there's some that you're going to have to farm out, I imagine, to consultants. There's some you're going to do internally, and it's the follow through on it. And it does lead to other work. It doesn't finish the work. It does lead to other things. So.
How about you, Julie?
I have a number of takeaways. One is, when you enter into a service delivery review, there's no need to feel threatened. I think this is something to support and something to embrace as a corporation, particularly if you're interested in transformational change, because this is your ticket. I also think it's critically important to involve as many staff across the corporation, right from frontline to senior management team, and ensuring that council is on board and ready to champion it. And lastly, I think it's important to select consultants who are intimately familiar with municipal services. I know other consultants exist who they do a really great job crunching numbers, but having to provide municipal context to consultants is something I don't think I would have had the capacity to do this year, given everything else that was going on. So having a team who understands your business come in and provide valuable recommendations was amazing. So those are my takeaways.
And how about you, Tamara?
I would say the biggest thing I found was to make sure you value the process as much as the end result, and really listen throughout it, because I think our staff and myself and our counselors probably just moved ahead a whole level just by having that time to interact with each other and really think through some of these issues and have some meaningful discussions on them, both internally and with the other townships. And it's helped them really as they're moving forward. I'm really seeing them reach out to the other townships with more effort and on a more regular basis, and referencing that, we're supposed to be doing this, so let's make this effort. And I think it really has made a difference. And really engage your staff and engage your council. That's the biggest thing I found has been helpful.
Well, so sadly, I have to say our time is at an end. I could chat with you guys about this all day. And thank you so much for making yourselves available to share your experiences with our audience. And I want to thank the Institute of Public Policy and Economy for making this platform available to us to share these insights. It's terrific to be doing this on the eve of a Roma conference when so many municipal people are gathering, albeit digitally. And it's great to be able to add this to that kind of thinking that's going on. Just please accept my thanks, Ken and Tamara and Julie, and thanks to all of you for watching this morning, and or on the online audience where it's been posted through YouTube. So thanks so much, and we'll look forward to convening another time to talk about important municipal issues.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care. Thanks, John.